Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Despina Karatias, Quality Tourism Business Trainer and Mentor here at wonderful Victoria Tourism Industry Council. Now, I'd like to begin our session today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from where you might be joining this session today. We are coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Burrunung peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their continued custodianship and deep spiritual connection to the lands and waters. We honour the strength and richness of over 60,000 years of continuous Aboriginal culture and recognise the vital role of future generations as stewards of culture and country. And now to our very important people of our session sharing today. I would love to welcome to you all. We've got Brenton, Reynolds and Maree Marshall, both directors at Urbis. And joining them in the panel session, we have the wonderful Peter Williams, director at Brady Hotels, and the effervescent Michael Robertson, manager at Sofitel Collins Street in Melbourne. Welcome to you all.
Thank you very much, Despina. So my name's Brenton Reynolds, director at Urbis and project director on this sustainability guide for the Melbourne hotel sector. This morning's presentation is really an introduction to the guide. So it's great to see so many of you on the call today, many of which I'm sure were at the masterclass a few months ago. So this has been a significant piece of work with the City of Melbourne and Urbis taking part in that. So what we'll do is move on. So as I mentioned, Brenton Reynolds, sustainability lead at Urbis. Maree Marshall will introduce herself shortly. She's going to do a deep dive into circular economy and waste in the hotel sector once we get onto that section of the guide. So in terms of what we're going to prepare today is, as I mentioned, Urbis has prepared this guide for the City of Melbourne. And the remit of this was to support sustainable and positive change in climate action and sustainability in the hotel sector. So how could that be best supported and in what type of format? So what we'll cover off today is, at a high level, purpose of the guide, an introduction to the guide, an inside look and highlights into what's included in there and what might be most beneficial to you as in the hotel sector and specifically to your type of hotel. As I mentioned, an inside spotlight into the circular economy and waste area that's so critical in the tourism and hotel sector, of course. As Despina mentioned, we're going to hear from Michael and from Peta as to how to use that guide and how they've already used the guide. They got a sneak peek, advanced copy, if you will. So they've already had a look through and already have some insights of how the guide can best be utilized for themselves. And then a bit of a discussion and Q&A section to follow, as Despina mentioned. So from the very beginning, the purpose of this guide is to provide practical guidance on initiatives and certifications to the hotel sector, but specifically focused on the City of Melbourne. Also to accelerate sustainability rating uptakes in certifications and increase the climate action in the hotel sector. But really, the purpose is to support hotels to benchmark, plan, and really to prioritize actions. Obviously, there's a lot of things which can be done over a significant period of time, but which ones to pick off first, which ones to plan for further down the pathway, but also how to align with guest, corporate and regulatory expectations and requirements, which are becoming much more significant as we move along. So just touching on what I mentioned before in terms of the process of how the guide was developed, the Sustainability Masterclass, which I would imagine many of you attended a few months ago at the Melbourne Town Hall, that really gave the attendees and us an insight into the challenges that the hotel sector is facing, also the areas in which potential support, education, awareness could be built on. And so following that masterclass, what we did was we consulted stakeholders, we consulted hotels. What do they need to hear? What support do they need to implement some of these sustainability initiatives? So following that, and thank you to those hotels, which many of you will be on the call, for taking the time to discuss that with us. And then the sustainability guide for the hotel sector was developed, and hence that's what we're launching today. And at the end of this, it will be able to be downloaded from various sites, which is exciting. And so what's actually in the guide? So I've mentioned guide about 100 times already now in the presentation. What's actually in it and how can it be utilized best? So if we just roll through the contents, part one is really a snapshot of sustainability in Melbourne hotels. So why is Melbourne hotels different? What are the certain characteristics of those hotels? And what are the specific challenges that those in Melbourne face compared to other states or countries? And then market guest expectations and reputation. So this is changing and changing rapidly. We heard from a lot of hotels about in terms of the market forces, the corporate governance side of things, in terms of neighbours ratings, recommendations to stay. The guest expectations are increasing rapidly, as we mentioned in the town hall masterclass, for example, the Booking.com statistics, which I'm sure many of you are across. And then reputation, of course, how significant this is moving in terms of people wanting to feel good about themselves from staying in sustainable hotels. And then the certifications and accreditations and the benefits of those and how critical these can be to a hotel and to the portfolio. But then really, that's the background. And then from then, well, where to begin? So on the sustainability journey, what types of initiatives can be rolled out? What types of costs are we looking at? What types of planning will be required? What types of compliance measures must be in place to implement some of these initiatives? And we've also included some snapshots of case studies in there. Always great to learn from other hotels, from their do's and don'ts, key lessons learned and the like. And then the feedback in the consultations that we received was checklists, something that is easily able to be worked through step by step. Was really something which came out strongly in terms of what people or hotels would like to have involved in the guide. And then a further resources toolkit. So further links, further resources, further documents to support hotels in their sustainability journey. And so part one, and what you'll see as we work through the presentation today is really just 10% excerpts of what's in the guide, just drawing out some key highlights and to give you guys a taste of what you will find in there. And so we can sort of support the use of this guide as best as possible. Just touching on, okay, well, as I mentioned, what's specific about Melbourne hotels? So what type of role does the Melbourne hotel sector play? What size are we talking about in terms of building sector emissions to the city of Melbourne? What does it contribute? What is the quantity? What type of occupancy rates are we looking at to date? How many hotel rooms? And also less than half of hotel rooms are certified with sustainability accreditation. So doubled up there. And then why sustainability matters. So as I mentioned before, like the considerations in terms of market trends, moving from that optional to essential, looking at regulatory and reputational risks, considering that commercial accommodation is the third largest share of emissions, and that, of course, some of these initiatives that we'll discuss today can really reduce emissions and cost savings within your hotel and within the portfolio. And then the guest experience, strengthening that satisfaction, building that brand loyalty, and aligning with those new guest expectations, which are starting to come about. And then just a few things to consider. So in terms of the minimum star rating standards, federal government employees are recommended already to stay in NABERS rated hotels, mandatory performance and energy efficiency disclosures. As I mentioned before, the Booking.com, in terms of 80% of global travelers are seeking sustainable accommodation. Cost savings. So NABERS at the town hall produced a very interesting case study in terms of looking at up to $500,000 in cost savings per annum across energy and water improvements. And then the funds. And so the guide also includes funds and programs which are available to the hotel sector for some of these sustainability initiatives. And then just thought I'd mention here at the end, in service of the Global Destination Sustainability Index, well, Melbourne's in second place to Sydney, and Brisbane is fast approaching. So really positioning Melbourne as strongest as possible in a sustainable sector and city position. But also then how the hotel fits in with the ecosystem and how many aspects it touches on, whether it's environmental, whether it's social, whether it's water use, whether it's waste, whether it's energy, how pivotal the hotel is to the sustainability ecosystem of a city. Just to touch briefly on market and guest expectations and branding and reputation, and I won't go through this verbatim, of course, because all of this is in the guide and more, as I mentioned earlier. And just to touch on the regulatory and reputational risks that are accelerating, sustainability, promoting guest loyalty and brand strength, innovation, and a lot of the stakeholders we spoke to were saying, okay, but what's next? How do we stay in front of the curve? Sustainability is becoming more prevalent across the hotel sector. How do we really keep ourselves advancing? And of course, what's the opportunity costs? So there's also the cost savings, which which will be achieved by taking action, but then also the opportunity costs of not taking action should be considered. So emerging market demand, policy shifts I mentioned, certification, accreditation, government regulations, climate-related financial disclosure, and how ownership models can cause some issues. But all of this is discussed in the guide, so I won't go through it too much detail, just sort of touching on what you can find in the guide. And then the certifications and accreditations. So this was a really significant discussion point at the town hall, and it was a really interesting one. So City of Melbourne requested Urbis to really go and do a deep dive into the guide. What types of certifications are available? What do they assess? What's their benefits? What's their costs? So you will find in the guide quite a deep dive into those. And as I mentioned, less than half of hotel rooms at the moment are rated. So as you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, this is an excerpt directly from the guide. And these touch on the certifications, summaries, who can apply, the benefits of those, some rough costs of those, and then the links directly to them. And just touching on a little bit on the right-hand side of the screen, well, why be certified? Why gain an accreditation? And so in terms of the value of sustainability, what the events and conference and planners, how much these trusted third-party certifications really frank your hotel as a sustainability venue and place to stay. Repeat business, loyalty in terms of sustainability labels and the amount of global travelers seeking that, trust, confidence, and of course, long-term savings. So those are just some of those sort of key benefits that can be drawn out. And then the question we got a lot at the town hall, which led to us sort of building out this journey, was, well, that's great, but where do I begin on this certification journey? So we've just touched on here some key sort of stepping stones towards getting that certification. In terms of determining what kind of certification you're seeking. And as I mentioned in the guide, it does cover off what those, the focus areas of those certifications and accreditations are. And I think key is understanding the requirements of those. So is it a yearly cost? How much data needs to be submitted? How much administration time needs to be involved in that? And then the developing an action plan, and then from the right-hand side of page 5 onwards, really focusing on, okay, well, this is the nuts and bolts of applying for a certification. How is this done in terms of compiling documentation, submitting the application? And then, as I mentioned, when's it due for renewal? How often do you need to do that? But I might take a pause there. You're probably already sick of my voice already. So what we'd like to do is hear from Michael. Michael's been a great sounding board throughout the development of the guide. And Michael, you wanted to say a few words, I believe, about the guide and some of the certification and accreditation topic.
Yes, thank you, Brenton. Bonjour, everyone. Yeah, I really want to talk about our certification journey at Sofitel Melbourne on Collins. So it started in 2015 when we achieved ISO 14001. That's an environmental management certificate that an organization can have. So we had it at a hotel, and it kind of really gave us some strong governance over, do we measure our waste? Do we know what our aspects and impacts are of our operation? Do we benchmark any of our performance? Do we have any corrective actions in place for anything to do better each time? And we loved it, thought it was great, thought it was everything that we needed until around 2022 when Accor Hotels and Sofitel, our Sofitel in Paris, kind of said that it's not enough. So ISO 14001 is a good thing to have, absolutely, a good thing to have for an environmental management system point of view, but it's not enough anymore. So they said that we need to start looking at some of the actual initiatives that you do on the ground, that making sure that what you're doing isn't just relevant for any organization, but it's hotel and hospitality specific. So they gave us a couple of options. They said you can go Green Globe, Green Key, and then Ecotourism Australia also came onto the scene, saying that this is the most relevant one in our local market. When we kind of assessed everything in 2022, we looked at what's really relevant for us. So Green Key is a really kind of heavy focus on around food waste, which we all absolutely should be doing. Ecotourism Australia is the most popular one here in Australia, so it makes sense for an Australian hotel or a hotel in the city of Melbourne to look at Ecotourism Australia. But when we kind of compete and work for our business, we always do it at a global level. So we really kind of started looking at Green Globe, Green Key, and Green Globe had this really great storytelling around how do you embed yourself in the local community. And it was really kind of focusing in on being a part of the city of Melbourne, not just being a sustainable property. So when we looked at Green Globe, it kind of helped our hotel give some governance over the practices we were already doing without even realizing it was sustainable. So we like to call ourselves Hotel for the Arts and work with different arts programs and artists and giving a platform for people. And we think it's the right thing to do, but it didn't really follow any brand standard that we had. It didn't kind of fit anything. It was just something that was like a legacy piece that we loved to do. So then when we were looking at certification, we said, well, which one kind of gives us that advantage or that voice to say that, well, we have to do this because it's good for us. So Green Globe became the key that we were started to look at. When we started it, it was a very rigorous process. You have to get 100% of mandatory criteria met, along with at least 50% of the non-mandatory criteria met, and with the expectation you have to improve year on year. We achieved certification within 6 weeks of applying. It was a very intense process for us. And it was a full overhaul of what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. One of the biggest changes was around communication. So our sustainability management plan that we had to develop, all of a sudden that now needs to be guest facing. So it's now on our website that anyone can access it. And a lot of our initiatives are always like behind closed doors, where now it has to be, well, how do you communicate with this, with your guests, with your owners, with your local community? So now all of this information is publicly available, whereas before we would just have it in a file on the computer. And that's kind of how our perception has changed and how people's going to see us. So we had our director of people and culture did an interview with a candidate in 2023 that were looking for a role with us. And one of the first questions the candidate asked our director of P&C was, oh, you just were certified with Green Globe, right? Can you tell me more about what you're doing for sustainability? And we were like gobsmacked, like, oh, this person actually knows what we're doing? Okay, let's go for it. So now when we're looking at our certification, we think about, if we were to operate again, what would we need to know? And having this guide available where we can easily see what certificate makes sense for our property is the easiest resource to look at. So like, it's kind of my big advice to the hotels on the call. When you're looking to see where do you start, know what your hotel already is, know what you'd like to do, and then look at what's the best fit for your brand. Not the most popular one, not the most relevant one, but what's the one that suits you, that can speak your language. That's my advice. Thanks, Brenton. Does that answer your question?
Perfect, Michael. Thank you very much for that. That was fantastic insights, and we may call on you a bit later on if there are questions from the attendees regarding your journey. So let's continue on here. And so we've walked through so far sort of that overview of the Melbourne hotel sector, certifications, accreditations. And so part 4 in the guide is really the sustainability journey, how to begin and what steps to take towards achieving sustainability. And some of these, I guess, most cost-effective impacts that can be taken. So as what we hear the most often is that hotels are unsure about what steps to take to begin and which areas to focus on. So this section really focuses on the key 4 areas. But before I get to that, what we've done within the guide, this is just an excerpt of it, is mapping the sustainability journey of the hotels depending on their, whether it's small, medium, large scale, whether it's portfolio driven, is really, as I mentioned before, similar to the certification, creating those stepping stones of what needs to be done and when, because everything can't be done at once, and it's not financially viable, of course, either. So mapping out what capital expenditure is required further down the line for the key significant interventions and what can be done low cost immediately, the low hanging fruit, if you will. And so really the first step is the baseline and the benchmark. So to conduct a sustainability audit, and you'll only know how to improve your property if you know the current condition and baseline of it. And it is quite incredible that without that audit, without the data, without the utilities knowledge, it's very difficult to map where to go from there. So you need that starting point in terms of regulatory requirements and benchmarking the performance. And really, that's what a lot of the accreditations do, is benchmarks the performance of your hotel against others to give an indication of where you are beginning, whether it's in front, behind, or equal to many of the others in the sector. And then the sustainability vision. So engaging and communicating with stakeholders of, well, this is where we're moving to. This is where we would like to reach. And then appoint responsibility within the organization of who's going to lead that. In terms of the stakeholder consultation we took part in with a lot of the hotel sector, it was very clear that there were clear champions of sustainability within those hotels which had been successful in their progression. And then the targets and a plan. So goals per year, reduction per year. What's the action plan? How is this going to be achieved? What costs are we going to set aside to achieve some of these? And what will the outcomes of those be? And what will the benefits of those be? And then the implementation. So now we're moving into, okay, let's reduce water use, reduce waste, source responsibly, train staff, engage with the guests. And then the key part of the implementation is to then measure and monitor the impact of those implementations to gain an understanding of, was that successful? Could it have been done better? What's the return on investment of what we just did, which only can be achieved through the measuring and monitoring of that. And then that's the verifying certification. And most importantly, really, is to celebrate the successes along the way and the continual improvement. So stay informed, review and update annually. We've got down the bottom here, refer to the checklists of how to begin in the guide. So there are clear step-by-step checklists of working through that, and each one of those has 3 or 4 areas underneath those. And then the key sustainability focus areas. So where to begin, that's one step, but then what to focus on is really another key area. Energy and emissions, circular economy and waste, water and social value. Those are the key 4. And in the guide, you will find practical checklists for energy and emissions, which can be, okay, we've achieved 80% of those, or it might be we've achieved 10% of those, but just listing those down and saying, is this applicable to my hotel? Is this applicable to the building? Is this financially feasible at this time? Or do we put this on the back burner for some time and focus on other areas? Circular economy and waste, which, as I mentioned, Maree will do a bit of a deep dive into that very shortly. Water use, and then the social value. So how can social sustainability initiatives, community inclusivity lead to better outcomes for the hotel? So let's hear from Maree now. I love this sort of interacting with the other panelists. So Maree, I'll be quiet again. If you'd just like to jump in and discuss some of your insights into circular economy and waste in the hotel sector.
Thanks, Brenton. Afternoon all, or morning actually, sorry, we're still not quite there. I'm Maree, for those who haven't met me. I spend a fair bit of time in hotel design, but I also spend a fair bit of time in helping hotels change the way they do things, whether it be a renovation or whether it actually be just an investigation as to what's happening in our dock. Can we do better? I'll let Brenton click the slides for me. But first, I'm just going to explain a little bit of language that we use that will really help you understand what's happening in your industry. So back in the 1970s, the EPA of Australia, well, it was actually New South Wales who led this, introduced what we knew as reduce, reuse, recycle. There was a triangle attached to it. Even Bob the Builder had an episode on reduce, reuse, recycle. But in 2022, when circular economy really started to take off and be known, it expanded the language. We now talk about 10 Rs, but they're all words you know and you use on a regular basis. And it's actually quite interesting that I'm going to give you some examples that relate to the 10 of them. But what's curious is that as citizens and as customers and as shoppers, we actually do a lot of this thinking in advance. So when the green shopping bag came in and the ban was approaching on no more single-use plastic bags, we actually achieved it over 12 months before it was mandatory. People got it. They said, yep, I can bring my bag to the shops. Yes, we had some early adopters. Yes, we had some at the end of the tail, but we actually did do it before the mandate came in for the majority of us. So when I'm thinking in the hotel industry and I'm advising people, the number one on refuse is the single-use toiletries. It's a no-brainer. The majority of you have already shifted. It's not a mandatory item yet, but you've already done it because you understand that, one, they're not recyclable. Two, you're actually paying for product, shampoo, conditioner, body wash, and you're discarding it. When I brought this idea to one of the very large premium hotels, they were using a luxury brand in those bottles, and they were horrified to think they were throwing away about 30% of the actual product. So the rethink is where you need to come up with ideas of what do you do instead. And of course, this is now quite well known. It's an item called a dispenser that are refilled. They're on the walls, in the bathrooms, sometimes in the kitchenettes. And I haven't had anyone come back to me and say, oh, Maree, the customers don't like it, because we actually understand it. Reduce is another really interesting one, and one that can be a little bit challenging. But plastic water bottles, single-use water bottles is a really big target area. I went to Hawaii over 10 years ago. There is no single-use plastic bottles. We had water stations, which shows you that can actually reduce what you're actually producing. We had beautifully branded bottles that they gave us. They were really thinking ahead on how do we actually reduce the amount of waste we generate. Otherwise, they would have been giving my family four water bottles every day. So 10 days, 40 water bottles. Yes, there's a lot of reduce to be happening. I'm not going to go into detail on everyone because we'll be here to Christmas. But there's a couple of key ones that you really need to be thinking about when you're purchasing and you're looking at, can I repair these items? Do they have removable covers on these items? Can I therefore wash any of my furnishings? Or am I actually having to discard items as soon as they're stained? So it's about joining the dots. I'm not going to hover any longer on this page. Brenton, if we can keep going. So here's the key ones. Operation and food waste, number one. Absolutely. You will get the main waste streams that you are going to get a snapshot of this in a minute, and food waste. Food waste has value for anyone who doesn't already use someone like an Oz Harvest who takes edible food. You're not only saving tipping, but you're actually giving a meal to somebody in need. So there's a social value to this, not just a waste value to this. Definitely reducing single-use items is your number 2. It saves an enormous amount of waste going to landfill, but it's also going to save you a fair bit of money. And then we start to move into the refurbishment and the upgrade. You're all constantly wanting to display premium quality. You're also wanting to have clients that are very happy with the suite that they're staying in or the room. So there's a couple of key tips. You all have engineering rooms with basic tools, but if you keep your product range small but high quality, you'll find that basic repairs can be done to whether they're chair legs or cushion covers. It will really save you a lot of money and a lot of waste going to landfill. And the other one is when you start to think about a fit out or an upgrade. If your kitchenette is coming as an entire pod and you cannot repair a single component because it's all joined together, you're going to be up for replacing the whole item. So when your design is happening at the start, if you're designing for maintenance and disassembly, you're going to have a much better chance at not having to replace the entire kitchen. And it's also, while we move into the next one, which is procurement, how many of your suppliers will take back the goods that you're purchasing? How many of them are interested in the end of life, whether it be floor coverings, so carpet, especially carpet in suites that might get damaged at different rates? Is your furniture got a supplier that's interested in taking it back and refurbishing it for you and then selling it to another market? And ideally, is there components, because not every seat on every couch is going to get worn at the same rate. Can the covers be replaced or just the cushions, the actual seat parts? So it will save you a lot of money, but also a lot of waste to landfill. Conferences and event spaces are also a huge one. They generate, I think you all know this, an enormous amount of food waste. If it's edible, it can go to people like Oz Harvest. I volunteered there only last month. They receive something like 7 tonne of food a day in Victoria. An enormous amount. It was all edible. A lot of it wasn't even out of its packets. It's common in the conference and event industry, but also, are you using single-use water bottles? Could we just have refillable water bottles? We do have some of the best drinking water in the world here in Melbourne. So there are a lot of basic things on the list here, but some of them you're already doing. That's fantastic. If you're doing all of them, I'm really impressed. Next, please, Brenton. Okay, so my list for hotels for your key waste streams, and then one challenge on the plastic water bottle. So I think you know the list. There's a couple in there that you're probably dabbling with: the soft plastics, the hard waste, and the e-waste. These are all mandatory if you're doing a new design, but if you've got an existing building, this is my top list. Charity and lost property, I know you're all pretty aware of the number of people who leave behind the old suitcase, the old clothing. There are charities that are really keen on these items, that people who come as visitors and take home only the new stuff that went home. I know this is a big item for a lot of you. But I'm going to leave you with, these are both water bottles from Hawaii, where you can't buy the single-use bottle. And so one's a premium product where your guests, if they haven't brought one with them, and you'd be surprised how many guests do arrive these days with their water bottle, they can either purchase or be gifted one. And then the less premium one is the more bladder type. I have some beautifully branded ones from my trip that I still use 10 years on. So there's a little takeaway on waste and circular economy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Maree. And so interesting to hear from you in regards to that, sort of from the supply chain procurement, from the retrofits and whole building approaches on circular economy, down to the waste streams and the simple things which can be done at that real tangible level as well. So I'm sure I'm sure we might hear from you later with some questions from the attendees. So what we'll do now is part 5 in the guide is, as I mentioned before, the stakeholder consultation in the hotel said checklist, checklist, checklist. Something that we can put in front of us and work through with our teams as to what we've achieved to date, what can be done further down the line, and in terms of the 4 key areas. So in the guide, you'll find significant checklists on energy and emissions, circular economy and waste, water sensitive designs and initiatives, and social value. So for example, if this is just an excerpt, so it by all means doesn't cover everything, but we just wanted to give an example of how we've graded these out here, is sorting them out by category. So if we take energy and emissions, lighting, heating, cooling, building fabric, appliances and equipment, and then domestic hot water systems. And then the checklists of, okay, what if we do the intervention, can we achieve from that? The description and the action. So sensors, for example, LEDs, zone temperature controls, energy efficient reverse cycle units. I'll leave you to read them all. I'm not going to go through them line by line as they're all in the guide. And then just separating out, okay, well, as a rule of thumb, obviously it depends on the asset, depends on the hotel, efficiency of scale if you do portfolio level or whatnot. But what's the difficulty of doing this? What's the impact of the performance of the building? Also considerations of course of the upfront costs, and then the operational savings that are taken into account, and also the disruption to the guests is something that needs to be considered, and the sequencing of how that would be actually implemented. And so, for example, another snapshot of if we look at the water sensitive initiatives for hotels, so separating it by category within guest rooms, linen and laundry, irrigation and landscaping for those which that's applicable to, cooling and heating, and back of house operations. And then the intervention, so install water efficient fixtures, linen reuse program. So as you go through the checklist, you may, as Maree mentioned, you may already be doing a number of these, but it's really important to tick those off and say, okay, fantastic, we are doing a lot of these initiatives, but then identifying those which perhaps haven't been picked up for whatever reason. And then the description and action of how those are actually implemented and carried out, and then difficulty, upfront costs, and the impact. But let's hear from Peta from Brady Hotels and Apartments, who has had a sneak peek, as I mentioned earlier, at the guide and has looked through the checklists. So Peta, did you just want to speak about what your findings are so far from the guide across the checklists?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brenton. Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. I guess first I wanted to say thank you to Urbis and City of Melbourne. It has been awesome to be part of this project and to be able to give some feedback. Initially, when sustainability landed on my desk 3 years ago, I'll be honest, I was totally overwhelmed. I look after the sales and marketing department for our 4 hotels in Melbourne, and it's already such a huge role. I was like, how am I ever going to look after sustainability, implement the things that needed to be done, and actually have a plan to how to do it? I was totally lost by that. So when the opportunity to work on this and go through the checklists, I felt like, oh, okay, all right, I actually have a plan now. Now, our hotels are built by Brady Construction. So when I was going through the checklist, so many things I was able just to tick off. Like, yes, we've already got, the bathrooms are sorted with low emission water, and, we've already got the sensors in the room. So there's lots of things that I was able to tick off, which made me start to feel like, okay, this is not going to be as bad as I expected. The checklist gave me a really clear framework on the different areas that we have to report on. I think it's honestly like for an independent hotel who doesn't have a group that's helping push what we need to do, this really helped me. Okay, here's my plan, here's the checklist, here's what I need to work on. And also which things I can start highlighting as wins today. So yes, there's a lot of things we need to do in the hotels, but a lot of the things can't be done because of money or time or people to actually do them. And when I met with Michelle Murphy at City of Melbourne, and I was talking about this accreditation process, which for me was just so overwhelming. We've got 4 hotels. How am I ever going to do it? She just said to me, just start with 1. just get one hotel accredited. So I'm happy to say that in the last 2 weeks, I've just signed up for ecotourism for our Jones Lane property. So I've started that process. It's a big one, but you know, just really starting was the biggest part. And I think having that checklist made me feel confident to go, okay, I can sign up and do this. So where did I really start like crunching it? So I got all the bills put together, you know, streamlined all of our processes to get what our energy reporting was so that I could actually have year-on-year figures. So I've been tracking it manually the last 2 years, but I've just signed up to NetNata, which is an automated tool that pulls our reporting out of our bills. So happy to say that I just had those results released from our last financial year, and we'll do that moving forward. So that took that project off my list. So the great thing about the guide is it gives you advice on, okay, things that you already are doing, how can you do it better? So that was a big thing for me. To try and stop the manual bill process was massive. I guess the other thing that we're doing was, as Maree mentioned, was in the waste reduction. There's so much waste in hotels, and we weren't flat packing cardboard boxes. We weren't like, there's just so many little things that we were able to roll out. We put 2 bin systems across our hotel room so the guests can also sort their waste before they get to before the housekeepers need to do it. And that actually showed us that we needed additional recycling bins. So just that small process of, let's actually work out how much waste we've got. What are we doing? What are we separating? We need some more bins. Great. So that's already been implemented. And I guess, you know, as Maree mentioned, we still haven't removed our single-use plastics in the rooms, but I have just had approval to do that. So we are working to make that change, and it should happen in the next 6 months, which is very excited. Look, I think that the 3 main checklists that I, have been working through is the environmental, the social sustainability, and the governance. And just being the governance checklist, starting to actually write the documents has just been too hard for me in the past. And I feel like now I know what needs to be included, and I've started writing those. We're doing this because we, as everybody needs to, we are going to work to get our neighbours score next year, and all the hotels accredited. So for me, working through this checklist was the process to give me the confidence to actually just do it. And, it isn't really about what your score is. It's about working to improve your score year on year, and not doing everything at once. Celebrate the wins, celebrate the things, talk about the things you're already doing. And then the things you haven't done yet, create a plan to be able to do that. That's it for me, Brenton.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peta. And congratulations on the progress that that you and Brady Hotels are making. Sounds fantastic, and I'm sure your insights are very valued by other hotels, and I would imagine many of them will be reaching out, tapping you on the shoulder to hear further about some of those insights. So thank you very much.
Happy to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Peta. So just jumping back in, and we're almost sort of at the end of the presentation, and we'll move into some sort of Q&A and discussions shortly. Just touching on some further content that you will find in the guide is some key case studies. So learning by examples in terms of energy, carbon, guest user experience, and adaptive reuse. So looking at the Holiday Inn in South Bank and the reduction in energy use, the Hilton and their menus and color coding of I think carbon neutral food, for example, the guest user experience in terms of corporate and conference sustainability focuses at Crystal Brook and Adina South Bank, which we've tried to cover a range of sort of scale. That's looking at a significant adaptive reuse and overbuild using being Australia's first CLT high-rise hotel. So where to from here? Well, the first step, download the guide. That's the number one. If you do anything after this call, download the guide. And then reach out to Urbis, City of Melbourne, or VTIC for any support if you have any issues with the guide, or you need some further support around that. All 3 organisations are more happy to help out. And then, as we discussed, and I should probably change that, conduct baseline audit to start the journey. Wherever your hotel is on that pathway, begin there and take it from there. Engage staff, suppliers, and stakeholders. As we mentioned earlier, from the stakeholder consultation, there really needed to be significant champions within an organization, but also the groundswell support around that to get a lot of these initiatives up and running. But I think, we think the most important thing also is, as Peter touched on, and as you heard from Michael, is to celebrate the steps and success and communicate that success as those are achieved, and be proud of the changes that you make and the sustainability impact that you're having in taking some of these steps and initiatives and changes to your hotel and portfolio. The other thing that you can do, and I think this will be discussed shortly, and I'm hoping I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, but to confirm your interest and respond to the survey of the City of Melbourne, who are organising if there's enough interest, organising a sustainability alliance approach to the hotels. So this momentum and this guide and the momentum within the sector can be continued, and really about knowledge sharing, building awareness within the sector, and supporting each other along the journey. So I think that comes to the end of our presentation anyway. Despina, I believe, do you take over now? I think this shows how well I've kept up to date with the agenda, but I think, Despina, you're jumping in now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, well done, team. Thank you so much. What an hour of power we've had. We're all better for joining, and thank you so much to all of you, Urbis, City of Melbourne, and of course Team VTIC. And thank you to those who have pre-submitted the question. I have actually written copious notes myself after that session. And I really, and just to share, I mean, there were just a lot of quotables and takeaways. Brenton, I really love what you said, really measure the opportunity cost of taking action, but then what does it mean? And what is the opportunity cost or loss of not taking action, in that moving or that next steps? And of course, I mean, look at that, from reduce, reuse, recycle, from Maree, what you've said, that it's expanded to like 10 R's now. But at the very first step, the refuse, it's on us to take that level of accountability and understanding, particularly in the hotel sector, that's not an overnight thing. And Peter, coming in just saying we've made the decision, but knowing, okay, this is going to take a 6 month journey. And Michael, knowing who you are, start with who you are and what you represent and what you value. You don't, we're not going against that, and then aligning and helping that bring out your voice. So really, really excellent stuff. Now, in terms of, we've had actually quite a few questions about what's the next step. Brenton, you've just shared that with us. Download the guide. And certainly with the team, there haven't been, and thanks, Beck, I'll get to, wonderful to have you here as well. Download the guide. The team is available post this session, particularly events@vtic.com.au and all of the Urbis team, and of course, City of Melbourne. Never hesitate to reach out once you've kind of ingested the guide, download it and have a read. And if you've got any more questions, reach out to the team. Now, in terms of, so we've kind of like where to begin. These are all great starts. We do have a question, thank you, Beck, around the tourism emissions reductions commitment program that is aligned. That is a very much, measured approach and a 5-step approach. Rebecca's asking, does the sustainability guide complement an initiative like the tourism emissions reductions commitment, and is that covered in there?
Absolutely, Despina. It absolutely complements it, no doubt. We haven't covered that within the guide itself because that's a program unto itself. We've focused specifically on the hotel sector and really specifically focused on Melbourne specifically from a snapshot perspective, but 100% complements it, and yeah.
Excellent. And the guide is available. I'll share QR code, and it will, in our follow-up, you will also have the link. Thank you for that too. So the guide is already available and live, and we will send you the links as well. Wonderful. All right, I'll keep going if that's all right, team. Now, how should hotels, when we talk about reporting and we look at the guest journey of the pre, during, and post, we had a question around reporting emissions that are avoided through virtual or digital first inspection. So if we're thinking corporate and the MICE sector, and how, and I guess the question is, are these recognised in reporting and procurement if they are avoided by not flying or physically visiting a property and doing a virtual inspection first? I don't know if that's for you, Brenton, or Maree.
It's a good question. Very specific, Despina. I would have to check with our energy team on that one, to be honest. And as we mentioned at the start, any of these questions can be submitted and we'll respond to those following. But I'm not 100% certain in terms of virtual inspections and the carbon abatement measures of that. That's something that we would need to investigate further. Yeah.
And I would say any type of initiative, and I'm only speaking to our VTIC Sustainable Tourism Accreditation, that actually, but you know, Michael talked to that too around that storytelling, that I think actually taking an initiative like that and making that like as part of your value proposition and actually putting that in any submission with any of the certifications that are available is not going to be dismissed. I would, you know, but I say that would actually hold great value, I know, in the VTIC accreditation. So I think any initiative is a good starting point. So when we talk about, so one of the units, so we've got someone, you know, that's working in a hotel and also is teaching sustainability as part of the William Angliss, you know, specifically for the hotel sector. And the question is, any innovations, challenges, or insights that will assist in the delivery of the unit? I think this whole presentation will give you a lot there that you can take back to your students. Unless anyone else had anything specific, I would go and say I think there was, you know, there was a lot of gold nuggets that you could take there. And of course, if you haven't downloaded the guide yet, there would be significant amount of insights.
Yeah, and probably just to speak to that, Despina, I think it also depends on the focus, and that's what we were sort of touching on a bit earlier in the presentation. Is it does depend on the focus of the hotel, or you know, in this instance of the course or teaching, because you need to be able to focus on those specific areas. And so I think that's really important as well. Is everyone who reads this guide will bring out their own different insights depending on the challenges they're facing. And I think that's what Urbis, with the City of Melbourne's support, has tried to cover off, is regardless of the challenges you're having, there is those insights within the guide to tick off those areas. And so I think, you know, thank you for the question. And hopefully there is a number of insights in there that they can take away with them. Yeah.
Can I add one more? If it's for the students and you want to add it to the to actually help with the depth of their thinking, a volunteer day at either one of the food rescues or one of the charities, so they can actually see what's happening to any of the waste streams, whether it's clothing and charity goods, whether it's the linen, or whether it's the food, for them to have an insight into how much is produced and where it's coming from. They might be really surprised and be starting to think about general initiatives they could be using within the hotel sector. I'm not talking about putting less quality food on the table. It's about, are you planning when you're putting it out so it's not exposed to the air and therefore no longer able to be sold? It's understanding the full process is something that you could add to your curricula.
That was a huge insight there, Maree, in terms of operation and food waste, and looking at you know, initiatives and projects to support like Oz Harvest as well. I think that would be a great thing to share with anybody, but certainly at that learning, you know, educational level with the students. Now, is Michael still here? I think this one, I'm just looking at the time as well, just quickly, because we've had a question come in around some initiatives that other properties have implemented that have had a significant impact. Now, you haven't touched on the incredible work that you've done, and I just thought that would be a great thing to end on. And all the other questions that we haven't covered, like I said, reach out to the team and we'll do our best to do the follow-ups with you directly. But Michael, if you'd just like to take the time to share what Sofitel have done, your great initiative.
Thanks, Mia. Yeah, part of the Green Globe requirement was that we have to advertise what we do. So we used to have a spreadsheet of all the different initiatives, and we used to look at measuring the impact and what's the value that we've had. So if we eliminate single-use plastic and we go home compostable, or we just reduce, what's the actual impact that we have? So now we have all of that on our website. So if you go to sofitel-melbourne.com.au, there's a whole section there called Our Commitment to Sustainability, which is relatively new for us. And there's a list there of initiatives that we've done. But in the guide, there are really practical examples of initiatives that are out there, and they have a full business case. So even that idea of avoiding a in-person hotel tour by doing one virtually, if you were trying to get CapEx approval of saying that I want to do a new initiative, if you can quantify what the impact of that initiative will be, you can then report on it. So when the VTIC do a award submission, they want to know what was the objective, did you do, and did you have the impact that you had? So as long as you start benchmarking what your actions are, I think that's a really good way to look at rolling out initiatives, to think about why are you doing it, and then can you quantify it?
Particularly things like your whole, a water plant.
Yeah, so that was on an easy
big
initiative.
time.
It took a few years to get it, but now, yeah, it's all on our website with the links to the suppliers that we work with to get there. So if you want some examples, they're there. There are plenty more out there. And yeah, the guide is a really good reference point for looking at what's next. What new things could you do that you might not have already looked at?
Fantastic. Now we do have, and thank you, Sally, just around, I think this is important. This is a focus, and this is supported by City of Melbourne, and it is Melbourne centric. Does regional hotels fit into this? Did we want to just address that, because we do have some regional operators on the call?
Thanks, Despina. Absolutely. I mean, most of the things that we've covered off in today's discussion are absolutely applicable to regional hotels as well. It was organised by the City of Melbourne, so it has focused on the City of Melbourne boundary in terms of the snapshot that sort of we showed at the start. But in terms of the approaches, principles and initiatives, absolutely, these are 100% applicable on regional hotels as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, well, look, thank you, everybody. I'm hope you guys gained a lot of value. Please reach out to the team if your if your questions weren't covered. Brenton, Maria, Peta, and Michael, the team at City of Melbourne, and your extended team at Urbis, thank you so much for the session, and thank you to everyone that joined us live, and also acknowledging and thank you to everyone that's come back to watch the recording.